They claimed she'd ruin any man, until the cowboy chose her and faced the whole territory. The gunshot tore through the saloon window just as Jake Morgan pushed through the doors. Glass exploded inward, and everyone hit the floor except the woman standing at the bar. She didn't flinch. She just turned those green eyes toward him and took another sip of whiskey. Jake had ridden 3 days straight to reach Cottonwood Creek, and he wasn't here for trouble. But trouble seemed to find Mary Sullivan wherever she went. The whole territory knew her name. They said she'd buried 2 husbands and driven a third to madness. They said she carried bad luck, like other women carried perfume. They said any man fool enough to get close to her would end up in the ground or the asylum. The sheriff burst through the back door, gun drawn. Behind him came 4 ranch hands from the Circle K spread. Their boss, Dale Cooper, had been making threats all week. He wanted Mary gone from town, said her presence was a curse on decent folk. Jake met the sheriff's eyes. "What's the charge?" "No charge," Sheriff Boyd muttered. "Just keeping the peace." "By shooting through windows?" Dale Cooper stepped forward, his face red with rage. "That woman killed my brother. Maybe not with her own hands, but she might as well have." He rode off a cliff in the dark, trying to reach her ranch. "She's poison." Mary set her glass down slowly. "Your brother was drunk, Dale. He'd been drunk for 3 years, long before I ever met him. You bewitched him, just like you did the others." Jake felt the weight of every eye in the saloon. He'd come here looking for work, maybe a fresh start. His reputation as a horsebreaker was solid, and the telegram from the Harrison Ranch had promised good pay, but that telegram had come from Mary Sullivan. She owned the Harrison spread now, inherited it from her second husband. "You Jake Morgan?" Mary asked. "I am. You still want that job?" Dale laughed, a harsh sound. "You accept work from her, Morgan, and you're finished in this territory. No one will do business with you. No one will sell you supplies. You'll be as cursed as she is." Jake studied Mary Sullivan. She was maybe 30, with sun-darkened skin and calluses on her hands that spoke of hard work. Her dress was simple, not the fancy clothes you'd expect from a woman who supposedly seduced men for their money. She looked tired. She looked alone. "The job's still open?" Jake asked. "It is. Then I accept." The saloon erupted. Dale's men moved forward, but Sheriff Boyd raised his hand. Everyone calmed down. "Morgan's free to work where he pleases." "He won't last a month," Dale spat. "Mark my words. She'll destroy him like she destroyed the others." Mary walked toward the door, and Jake fell into step beside her. Outside, the street was empty. Curtains twitched in windows. People were watching, always watching. "You didn't have to do that," Mary said quietly. "Do what?" "Throw your life away for a job. I needed work. You offered it." She untied her horse, a solid bay mare. "My first husband died in a farming accident. My second had a heart condition no one knew about. The third, Henry, he did go mad, but it wasn't my fault. Something happened to him during the war. He'd wake up screaming, seeing things that weren't there. Why'd you stay in Cottonwood Creek? The ranch is here. It's all I have." "Then I guess we'd better get to work." As they rode out of town, Jake felt the weight of hostile stares. He'd made his choice, and there was no going back now. The whole territory would be against him. But something in Mary Sullivan's eyes told him the truth was different from the stories. And Jake Morgan had never been one to believe rumors over his own judgment. The trouble was just beginning. The ride to the Harrison Ranch took 2 hours through rough country. Mary didn't speak much, and Jake didn't push. He watched how she sat her horse, how she scanned the horizon like someone expecting trouble. When they finally crested the hill overlooking her property, Jake understood why she needed help. The ranch was in bad shape. Fences were down in a dozen places. The barn roof had holes. Several horses wandered loose in what should have been secured pastures. But the land itself was good, with a creek running through it and plenty of grass. "How many head you running?" Jake asked. "Should be 40 horses. I've only been able to account for 32. The rest either wandered off through the broken fences or were stolen." "Stolen?" "Dale Cooper wants this land. He's made offers. When I refused to sell, things started going wrong. Tools disappearing. Fences cut. 2 weeks ago, someone poisoned my well. I had to dig a new one." Jake surveyed the property. It would take months to get everything right, and that was with a full crew. "How many hands you got?" "Just old Pete. He's 70 and can barely lift a saddle anymore. Everyone else quit after Henry died." The front door of the ranch house opened, and a grizzled man stepped out. Pete looked Jake up and down with suspicious eyes. This the new fellow?" "Jake Morgan," Mary said. "He's the horsebreaker I telegraphed. He know what he's getting into. Dale Cooper made that clear in town. Pete spat tobacco juice into the dirt. Then he's either brave or stupid. Maybe both, Jake said. That got a slight smile from the old man. Well, come on then. I'll show you the bunkhouse. It ain't much, but the roof don't leak too bad. The bunkhouse was small but clean. Mary had clearly tried to maintain it despite everything. Jake dropped his gear on a bunk and followed Pete back outside. Miss Mary's a good woman, Pete said quietly. Don't believe what they say in town. Her first husband, John Harrison, was my nephew. That tractor rolled on him. Pure accident. Could have happened to anyone. Her second husband, Frank, had a bad ticker. Doctor told him to take it easy, but Frank was stubborn. Worked himself to death trying to prove he was still young. What about the third husband? Henry? Pete's face darkened. That's more complicated. Henry came back from the war different. He'd see things, hear things. Some nights he'd grab his rifle and shoot at shadows. Mary tried to help him, got him to see doctors in the city. They couldn't do nothing for him. One day he just rode off and never came back. They found him 6 months later, living wild in the mountains, talking to people who weren't there. He's in an asylum now over in Silver Ridge. So the rumors? Started by Dale Cooper and folks like him. They needed someone to blame for their own failures. Mary inherited good land, and that made her a target. Dale's been buying up property all over the territory. He wants to be the biggest rancher for 300 miles. Mary's ranch sits right in the middle of land he already owns. If he gets this place, he controls the whole valley. Jake understood now. This wasn't about superstition or bad luck. This was about greed and power. Dale Cooper was using fear to drive Mary out, and the whole town was going along with it. We've got work to do, Jake said. They started with the fences. Pete showed Jake where the wire and posts were stored, and they spent the rest of the afternoon repairing the worst sections. Mary worked alongside them, handling the wire while Jake drove posts. She was strong and capable, not the delicate curse some people claimed. As the sun began to set, riders appeared on the ridge overlooking the ranch. 5 men, sitting their horses in a line, watching. Jake recognized Dale Cooper's silhouette in the center. They do that every few days, Mary said. Just watching, making sure I know they're there. They ever come down? Not yet. I think Dale's waiting for me to give up and leave on my own. It'd be cleaner that way. No legal problems. Jake set down his post driver and stared up at the ridge. The riders sat there for another 10 minutes, then turned and disappeared over the crest. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Mary's situation, about Dale Cooper's intimidation tactics, about the whole territory turning against one woman because of lies and greed. He'd faced difficult situations before, but this felt different. This felt personal, even though he'd only just arrived. Around midnight, he heard horses. He grabbed his rifle and moved to the window. In the moonlight, he could see 3 riders approaching the barn. They were moving slowly, quietly, trying not to wake anyone. Jake slipped out of the bunkhouse and circled around behind them. He got close enough to hear their whispered conversation. Just scatter the horses, one said. Cooper wants them run off, not hurt. He doesn't want the law involved. What about Morgan? Cooper says to leave him alone for now. Maybe he'll wise up and quit once he sees what he's up against. Jake stepped out of the shadows, rifle raised. You boys are trespassing. All 3 men spun around, hands dropping to their guns. Jake recognized them from the saloon, Dale Cooper's ranch hands. Easy, Jake said. You don't want to draw on me. We're just passing through, one of them said. At midnight? Through someone's barn? The 3 men exchanged glances. They were young, probably in their 20s, and they looked uncertain. These weren't hardened criminals. They were just cowboys following their boss's orders. Tell Cooper that Mary Sullivan isn't alone anymore, Jake said. Tell him that anyone who comes onto this property uninvited will be treated as the criminals they are. Tell him I'm not afraid of his threats or his reputation. Cooper's going to hear about this, one of them said. I'm counting on it. The 3 riders backed their horses away, then turned and galloped off into the darkness. Jake watched until they disappeared, then walked back to the bunkhouse. He found Mary standing on her porch, a shotgun in her hands. I heard voices. Cooper's men. They wanted to scatter your horses. Did you stop them? I did. Mary was quiet for a moment. Jake, you should know what you're really up against. Dale Cooper doesn't just have ranch hands. He has the sheriff in his pocket. He has half the businessmen in town dependent on his money. He has connections to the territorial government. If he decides to come after you directly, there's not much law that will protect you. Then we'll have to protect ourselves. Why are you doing this? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Jake considered the question. I've spent my whole life watching people get pushed around by those with more money and power. I've seen good people lose everything because they couldn't fight back. Maybe I'm tired of watching. Maybe I want to be on the right side for once. Mary studied his face in the moonlight. Or maybe you've got your own demons you're running from. She wasn't wrong. Jake had left his own troubles behind in Wyoming, had ridden south looking for a fresh start. But standing up to Dale Cooper felt like something more than just a job. It felt like a chance to prove he was more than his past mistakes. Get some sleep, Mary said. Tomorrow's going to be harder. She was right about that. The next morning, Pete rode into town for supplies and came back empty-handed. Every store had refused to sell to him. The general store owner, the feed supplier, even the blacksmith had turned him away. Cooper's made his move, Pete said. He's cut us off. Mary's jaw tightened. We've got enough food for a few weeks.
The horses can graze. We'll manage.
But Jake knew they couldn't manage forever. Without supplies, without the ability to sell horses or buy what they needed, the ranch would slowly strangle. Dale Cooper was playing a long game, and he held all the cards. There's got to be someone in town who isn't afraid of Cooper, Jake said. There's Doc Miller, Mary said slowly. He's old and stubborn, doesn't care much for threats. And Lisa Chen at the boarding house. She's never been friendly with Dale. Then maybe we've got allies after all. Pete shook his head. Allies don't mean much when the whole territory's against you. Jake walked to the edge of the property and looked out at the valley. The sun was climbing high, burning off the morning mist. Somewhere out there, Dale Cooper was planning his next move. And somewhere in town, people were watching, waiting to see how this would play out. The choice Jake had made in that saloon was bigger than he'd realized. It wasn't just about a job or helping one woman. It was about standing up to corruption and greed, about fighting for what was right even when the odds were impossible. He thought about the 3 riders from last night, about how young and uncertain they'd seemed. Maybe not everyone working for Dale Cooper was truly loyal. Maybe there were cracks in the man's empire that could be exploited. Mary came to stand beside him. You can still leave. Take your horse and ride out. Cooper would probably leave you alone if you quit now. Is that what you want? I want you to understand what staying means. Cooper won't stop. He'll escalate. People might get hurt. Then we'd better be ready. Mary nodded slowly, and Jake saw something shift in her expression. For the first time since he'd met her, she didn't look quite so alone. The war for the Harrison Ranch had begun, and Jake Morgan wasn't backing down. Over the next week, Jake worked from dawn until after dark. He repaired fences, rounded up scattered horses, and patched the barn roof. Pete helped where he could, and Mary worked alongside them both. The ranch slowly began to look less abandoned, more like someone actually lived there and cared. But the pressure from Dale Cooper increased. Riders appeared on the ridge every evening, watching. Once, Jake found a dead coyote hung on the fence line, a clear warning. Another time, someone cut through a water line in the middle of the night. On the 8th day, Jake rode into town alone. He needed to test the waters, see if there was any way to break Cooper's economic blockade. He tied his horse outside Doc Miller's office and knocked. The door opened to reveal a white-haired man with sharp eyes. You're the fool working for Mary Sullivan. I'm Jake Morgan. I need medical supplies. Doc Miller studied him for a long moment, then stepped aside. Come in. The office was cluttered with books and bottles, the smell of antiseptic heavy in the air. Doc Miller gestured to a chair. I heard what happened at the saloon. Heard you stood up to Dale Cooper. I took a job. That's all. That's not all, and you know it. Cooper's been terrorizing Mary for months. The whole town's been too scared to help her. Are you scared? Doc Miller laughed. I'm 83 years old, son. I've survived 2 wars, 3 wives, and more gunfights than I can count. Dale Cooper doesn't frighten me. What do you need? Jake gave him a list of basic medical supplies. Doc Miller gathered them without hesitation and refused payment. Mary's been through enough. She doesn't need to pay for bandages. Why doesn't anyone else in town help her? Fear. Dale Cooper owns most of the businesses either directly or through loans. He's got the sheriff and the mayor in his pocket. Anyone who crosses him loses everything. Most folks here have families to feed. They can't afford to be heroes. But you can. I'm old and rich and don't give a damn about Dale Cooper's opinion. But I'm just one man. I can give you supplies, but I can't change the whole territory. Jake left the doctor's office with the supplies and a growing sense of how deeply Cooper's influence ran. The man had built a system of control that was hard to fight without attacking it from multiple angles. He was about to mount his horse when he saw a woman standing in the shadow of the general store. She was young, maybe 25, with dark hair and eyes that held a mixture of fear and determination. She beckoned to him. Jake walked over carefully. "Can I help you? I'm Lisa Chen. I run the boarding house." "Doc Miller told me you were in town. You have something to say?" "Not here. Too many eyes. Meet me behind the church in an hour. Come alone." She hurried away before Jake could respond. He considered ignoring the meeting, but curiosity got the better of him. An hour later, he tied his horse near the church and walked around to the back.
Lisa was waiting, looking nervous. "I don't have much time."
"My husband would be furious if he knew I was talking to you." "So why are you?" "Because what's happening to Mary Sullivan is wrong, and because Dale Cooper is planning something worse." Jake's attention sharpened. "What do you mean?" "I overhear things at the boarding house. Cooper's men stay there sometimes. 2 nights ago, I heard them talking. Cooper's planning to burn Mary out. He's going to wait until the next new moon when it's darkest, then set fire to her barn and house. He figures she'll run then, or be forced to sell the land for nothing." "When's the new moon?" 5 days from now." Jake felt cold anger settle in his chest. Arson was serious, potentially deadly. If Cooper was willing to go that far, there was no telling what else he might do. "Why are you telling me this?" Lisa's eyes filled with tears. "My husband borrowed money from Cooper to expand the boarding house. We're trapped, just like everyone else. But I can't stand by and watch him murder someone. Mary Sullivan never did anything wrong. She's just trying to survive. Does anyone else know about Cooper's plan? If they do, they're not talking about it. Most people would rather pretend they don't know." Jake thanked Lisa and returned to his horse. He had 5 days to prepare for an attack that could destroy everything Mary had built. 5 days to figure out how to stop a man who controlled an entire territory. When he got back to the ranch, he found Mary shoeing the horse while Pete mended tack. He pulled them both aside and explained what Lisa had told him. Mary's face went pale. "He's really going to burn us out?" "That's the plan. We have 5 days to get ready." "Ready how?" "We can't fight off Cooper and all his men. Maybe we don't have to fight all of them. Maybe we just need to make it too costly for Cooper to continue." Pete scratched his beard. "What are you thinking?" Jake laid out his idea. It was risky and required perfect timing, but it was the only chance they had. If they could turn Cooper's attack against him, if they could expose what he was doing and make it public enough that even his bought and paid for law couldn't ignore it, they might have a chance. "It could get us killed," Mary said. "Doing nothing will definitely get your ranch burned down." She looked at Pete, who shrugged. "I'm too old to start over somewhere else." "Might as well go down fighting." Mary turned back to Jake. "All right, we do it your way. But if this goes wrong, I want you to know I'm grateful you tried. It won't go wrong." But Jake wasn't as confident as he sounded. They were 3 people against an army, and the odds were stacked impossibly high. Still, he'd learned long ago that sometimes impossible odds were the only ones worth fighting for. Over the next 5 days, they prepared. Jake rode the property lines every morning and evening, memorizing every approach to the ranch. He and Pete gathered everything flammable and moved it away from the barn and house. They filled barrels with water and positioned them strategically. They created escape routes and safe zones. On the 4th night, Jake rode back into town after dark. He found Doc Miller and explained what was going to happen. The old doctor listened carefully, then nodded. "I'll be ready with the wagon. But you'd better be right about this, Morgan. If you're wrong, people could die." "I'm not wrong." Jake also found Lisa Chen and told her to make sure she and her husband were nowhere near the boarding house on the night of the new moon. She promised she would find an excuse to visit family. On the 5th day, as the sun set and darkness gathered, Jake, Mary, and Pete took their positions. They'd turned off all the lamps in the house and barn, making it look like everyone was asleep. In reality, they were hidden in carefully chosen spots with clear views of all approaches. The wait was agonizing. Midnight came and went. 1 a.m. 2. Jake was starting to wonder if Lisa's information had been wrong when he heard the sound of horses moving quietly through the darkness. He counted 7 riders approaching from the east. They were moving slowly, trying to stay silent. When they got within 100 yards of the barn, they stopped and dismounted. Jake could see them preparing torches, soaking rags in kerosene. Dale Cooper was there, directing his men. They thought they were invisible in the darkness, that their crime would go unnoticed until the flames were too large to stop. They were wrong. Jake fired a shot into the air. The sharp crack split the night, and suddenly the ranch was flooded with light. Pete had triggered the system they'd built, lighting oil lamps they'd positioned all around the property. The 7 men were suddenly exposed, standing there with torches and kerosene caught in the act. Coming up the road from town was a wagon driven by Doc Miller, carrying not just the old doctor, but 3 men Jake didn't recognize. As the wagon got closer, Jake saw they were wearing badges, not the local sheriff, but territorial marshals. Dale Cooper saw them too. His face went from confident to panicked in an instant. He barked orders at his men to run, but it was too late. The marshals were already there, guns drawn. "Nobody move!" one of the marshals called out. "You're all under arrest for attempted arson." Cooper tried to bluster his way out. "This is a misunderstanding. We were just checking on the property?" "With torches and kerosene," the marshal said. "At 2 a.m? Save it for the judge." Jake, Mary, and Pete emerged from their hiding spots. Mary's face was flushed with triumph and relief. They'd done it. They'd caught Cooper red-handed, with witnesses who couldn't be bought off. Doc Miller climbed down from the wagon. "I wired the territorial capital 4 days ago and explained the situation. These marshals had been investigating Cooper's land deals for months. They were looking for an excuse to move against him. You just gave them one. The marshals rounded up Cooper and his men, confiscating their weapons and restraining them." Cooper glared at Jake with pure hatred. "This isn't over, Morgan. You hear me? This isn't over." "Yeah, it is," Jake said quietly. "You're done." As the marshals loaded their prisoners into the wagon, one of them approached Mary. "Ma'am, we'll need you to come to town tomorrow and give a statement. We'll also need statements from Mr. Morgan and Pete here." "Of course." "Thank you for coming." "Thank Doc Miller. He's the one who wouldn't let this go. He wrote letters to everyone in the territorial government until someone listened." After the marshals left with their prisoners, the 3 of them stood in the yard, exhausted and relieved. There would be trials and testimony, and Cooper's allies would try to protect him. But the immediate threat was gone, and Mary's ranch was safe. "I can't believe it worked," Mary said softly. "It worked because you didn't give up," Jake replied. Pete headed to the bunkhouse, leaving Jake and Mary alone in the yard. The night was quiet now, peaceful. Above them, stars filled the sky. "What are you going to do now?" Mary asked. "You came here for a job breaking horses. You got a war instead." "The job's still here, isn't it? You still need help with the ranch?" "I do. But I'll understand if you want to move on. You've done more than enough." Jake looked at the ranch house, the barn, the corrals. He thought about the past 2 weeks, about standing up to Dale Cooper, about fighting for something that mattered. For the first time in years, he felt like he'd found a place where he belonged. "I think I'll stay," he said, "if the offer's still open." Mary smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her face. "The offer's still open." They stood there for a moment longer. 2 people who'd survived impossible odds. The territory had claimed Mary Sullivan would ruin any man who got close to her. But Jake Morgan had chosen her anyway, had faced down the whole territory, and had emerged victorious. Maybe the curse was finally broken, or maybe there had never been a curse at all, just lies and fear and people too scared to stand up for what was right. Either way, the future looked different now. The next morning, Jake rode into town with Mary and Pete for their appointment with the territorial marshals. The main street was already buzzing with news of Dale Cooper's arrest. People stared as they passed, and Jake could see the mixture of shock and shame on many faces. They'd all stood by while Cooper terrorized Mary. Now they had to face what their silence had enabled. At the marshal's office, they each gave detailed statements about the months of harassment, the economic blockade, and finally the attempted arson. The lead marshal, a serious man named Frank Coleman, took careful notes. "Cooper's going to claim he was just checking on the property," Coleman said. "His lawyers will try to explain away the torches and kerosene." "You've got 7 witnesses to what he was doing," Jake pointed out. 6 of those witnesses work for Cooper. They'll say whatever he tells them to say. It'll be his word and his men's word against yours." Mary's face fell. "So he's going to get away with it?" "I didn't say that. Cooper's been under investigation for other crimes. Land fraud, intimidation, corruption of public officials. We've been building a case for 6 months. This attempted arson is just one more piece of evidence. Doc Miller's letters gave us the push we needed to move now instead of waiting." "How long until trial?" Jake asked. "Could be months. Cooper will post bail today, probably. He's got enough money and influence to make this complicated. In the meantime, I'm stationing a deputy here in Cottonwood Creek. Someone who doesn't work for Cooper and can't be bought. His job will be to make sure no one interferes with potential witnesses." After they finished with the marshals, Jake walked down to the general store. The owner, a nervous man named Paul Grant, was behind the counter. He saw Jake coming and immediately looked uncomfortable. "I need supplies," Jake said simply. "Look, Morgan, I can't. Cooper's going to make bail. If I sell to you, he'll ruin me." "Cooper's not going to be in a position to ruin anyone for a long time, and the territorial marshals are watching now. You really want them to know you participated in an illegal economic blockade?" Paul Grant's face went white. "Economic blockade? I was just following Cooper's wishes. That's called conspiracy. The marshals are very interested in how Cooper maintained his control over this town. I'm sure they'd love to talk to all the business owners who helped him. It was a bluff, but not much of one." Jake had seen how seriously the marshals were taking this case. Paul Grant clearly saw it too because he started pulling supplies off the shelves. "What do you need?" Jake gave him the list, and Paul filled it without further argument. As Jake was loading the supplies onto his horse, he saw other townspeople watching from windows and doorways. Word was spreading fast. The man who'd controlled Cottonwood Creek for years was in jail, and the balance of power was shifting. Lisa Chen caught up with him as he was preparing to leave. She looked frightened, but determined. "I gave the marshals a statement about what I overheard. My husband's furious, but I don't care anymore. What Cooper was planning was wrong. You did the right thing." "I hope so. I hope this is the end of it." But Jake knew it wasn't the end. Dale Cooper had built his empire over years, and it wouldn't collapse overnight. There would be legal battles, attempts at revenge, pressure on witnesses. The fight was far from over. When Jake got back to the ranch, he found Mary sitting on the porch, staring out at the valley. She looked exhausted, like all the strain of the past months was finally catching up with her. "How'd it go in town?" she asked. "Grant sold us supplies." Lisa Chen gave a statement to the marshals. "Things are changing. For now. What happens when Cooper posts bail and comes back? Then we deal with it, but he won't have the same power he had before. The marshals are watching. The town knows what he tried to do. His empire is cracking." Mary was quiet for a moment. "I keep thinking about what people said about me, that I was cursed, that I ruined any man who got close to me. Part of me believed it, you know. After 3 husbands, after everything that happened, I started to wonder if maybe they were right. They weren't right. Bad things happen sometimes. That doesn't make you cursed. John died because a tractor rolled. Frank died because his heart was weak. Henry lost his mind because of things he saw in the war. None of it was my fault, but I carried the guilt anyway. And people were happy to let me carry it because it was easier than facing their own fears." Jake sat down beside her. "Dale Cooper used that guilt to isolate you. He turned the town against you so he could take your land. That's not about curses or bad luck. That's just greed. You weren't afraid, though. Why? Maybe I've seen enough of the world to know that rumors are usually lies. Maybe I'm just stubborn. Or maybe I recognized something in you that reminded me of myself." "What's that?" "Someone who's been knocked down but refuses to stay down. Someone who keeps fighting even when everyone says you should quit." Mary looked at him with those green eyes, and Jake saw something shift in her expression. Gratitude, maybe, or recognition, or something more complicated that neither of them was ready to name. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for choosing to stay, for facing the whole territory with me. We're not done facing it yet, but we're still standing." Over the next few weeks, the transformation was remarkable. With access to supplies again, Mary's ranch began to truly recover. They repaired the rest of the fences, fixed the barn roof properly, and rounded up the missing horses. Word spread that Mary Sullivan was hiring, and to everyone's surprise, 3 ranch hands from neighboring spreads asked for jobs. They were young men who'd been quietly disgusted by Dale Cooper's tactics but too afraid to speak up before. The trial date was set for late autumn. Cooper had indeed posted bail and returned to Cottonwood Creek, but he was a changed man. The arrogant confidence was gone, replaced by a desperate edge. His lawyers filed motion after motion, trying to delay the trial or get the charges dismissed. Nothing worked. In July, one of Cooper's key associates, a banker named Richard Stone, was arrested for loan fraud. He made a deal with the marshals, agreeing to testify about Cooper's broader criminal enterprise in exchange for a reduced sentence. The case against Cooper was getting stronger every day. Jake settled into life at the Harrison Ranch. He worked with the horses, trained the new hands, and helped Mary plan improvements for the property. In the evenings, he and Mary would sit on the porch and talk about everything and nothing. She told him about her childhood in Kansas, about coming west with her first husband full of dreams. He told her about growing up in Wyoming, about the mistakes he'd made and the reasons he'd left. They didn't talk about what was growing between them. It felt too fragile, too new, but it was there in the way they moved around each other, in the small gestures of care and concern, in the comfortable silences. In August, Sheriff Boyd was removed from office. The territorial governor appointed a new sheriff, a former marshal named Jim Peterson who had no connections to Dale Cooper. Peterson immediately began investigating the corruption that had allowed Cooper to operate unchecked for so long. One evening in September, Jake and Mary were riding the property line when they saw smoke rising from the direction of Cooper's ranch. By the time they got close enough to see clearly, they could tell it was a controlled burn, clearing brush. But standing and watching it was Dale Cooper himself, alone. Jake considered riding away, but something made him approach. Mary stayed back, letting him go alone. Cooper watched him come without expression. Up close, the man looked 10 years older than he had 4 months ago. The weight of his crumbling empire was visible in every line of his face. Come to gloat, Morgan? No. Just passing through. I underestimated you. I thought you'd be like the others, scared off by a few threats. I didn't expect you to actually fight back. You didn't give me much choice. Cooper was quiet for a moment, watching the smoke rise. I built something here. 30 years of work, and it's all falling apart because of one woman and one stubborn cowboy. You built it on fear and corruption. That kind of empire always falls eventually. Maybe. Or maybe I just got unlucky. Cooper turned to face him. The trial's in 6 weeks. My lawyers say I'll probably get 5 to 10 years. Maybe more if Stone's testimony is as damaging as they think it'll be. That's between you and the law. When I get out, if I get out, I'm leaving this territory. There's nothing left for me here. The ranch will be sold. My associates have all turned on me. Everything I built is gone. He paused. Take care of Mary Sullivan. She deserves better than what this territory gave her. It was the closest thing to an apology Jake was likely to get. He nodded once and rode back to where Mary was waiting. What did he say? She asked. He's done. He knows it's over? They rode back to the ranch in silence. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. The land looked peaceful, beautiful. It was hard to believe that just a few months ago this had been a battleground. When they reached the barn, Mary dismounted and turned to Jake. I need to tell you something. All right. When you first came here, I thought you'd stay a few days and then leave like everyone else. I thought I was destined to be alone, to fight these battles by myself forever, but you stayed. You stood up to Dale Cooper and the whole territory, and you changed everything. We changed it together. No, you changed me. You reminded me that I'm not cursed, that I deserve to be happy, that I don't have to carry guilt for things that weren't my fault. And somewhere along the way, I started to feel something I haven't felt in years. Jake's heart was pounding. What's that? Hope. And something more than hope. She stepped closer. I think I'm falling in love with you, Jake Morgan. And that terrifies me, because everyone I've loved has left me one way or another. Jake reached out and took her hand. I'm not leaving. I made my choice that day in the saloon, and I'm standing by it. Whatever happens, whatever comes next, I'm here. Mary searched his face, and whatever she saw there must have reassured her, because she smiled. Then I guess we're both taking a chance. The best things in life are chances. They stood there in the fading light, two people who'd faced impossible odds and survived. The territory had claimed Mary Sullivan would ruin any man who got close to her, but Jake Morgan had proven them all wrong. He'd chosen her, faced down her enemies, and found something he'd been looking for without even knowing it. Love. Partnership. Home. The trial would come, and there would be other challenges ahead. But standing there with Mary's hand in his, Jake felt certain they could face anything together. The curse, if it had ever really existed, was broken. In its place was something real and solid and true. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the first stars began to appear. Tomorrow would bring new work, new challenges. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, both Jake and Mary could simply breathe and be grateful for what they'd found in each other. The territory had tried to destroy them. Instead, they'd found a way to build something stronger than fear, stronger than lies, stronger than greed. They'd found each other, and that was worth fighting for. Dale Cooper's trial began on a crisp October morning. The courtroom in Silver Ridge was packed with spectators from across the territory. Jake sat in the front row next to Mary, their hands clasped together. Pete sat on Mary's other side, looking uncomfortable in his best clothes. The prosecution's case was devastating. They presented evidence of land fraud, witness intimidation, arson, and corruption spanning nearly a decade. Richard Stone's testimony was particularly damaging, revealing how Cooper had systematically bought off officials and destroyed anyone who opposed him. When it was Mary's turn to testify, she spoke clearly and calmly about the months of harassment, the economic blockade, and the attempted arson. The defense attorney tried to rattle her, suggesting she'd somehow brought the trouble on herself, but Mary didn't waver. Jake testified about what he'd witnessed, about the threats and intimidation, about catching Cooper's men red-handed. The defense tried to paint him as an outsider who didn't understand the territory's ways, but the facts were undeniable. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all major charges. Cooper showed no emotion as the judge sentenced him to 12 years in the territorial prison. As the marshals led Cooper away in chains, he looked back at the courtroom. His eyes found Jake and Mary, and for just a moment, something like regret crossed his face. Then he was gone, disappearing through a door to begin his sentence. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed them. Mary handled their questions with grace, emphasizing that she just wanted to move forward and rebuild her ranch. Jake stayed quiet, letting Mary have her moment. Sheriff Peterson approached as the crowd dispersed. This case sent a message across the territory. People are starting to come forward about other corrupt officials, other men who've been operating like Cooper. You two started something bigger than you probably realize. We just wanted to save a ranch, Mary said. Maybe. But sometimes one act of courage inspires others. The territory's changing because you stood your ground. They returned to Cottonwood Creek as local heroes. The same townspeople who'd shunned Mary for months now wanted to shake her hand and apologize. Some of the apologies were genuine. Others felt hollow, driven more by social pressure than real remorse. Mary accepted them all with quiet dignity. Paul Grant at the general store tried to explain why he'd participated in the blockade. I have a family to feed. I couldn't afford to lose Cooper's business. I understand fear, Mary told him. I lived with it every day. But fear isn't an excuse for helping someone terrorize an innocent person. You made your choices. I hope you make better ones in the future. It was the right thing to say, and Grant knew it. He nodded, ashamed, and offered Mary credit on her account. She declined politely. Life settled into a new rhythm. The Harrison Ranch thrived under Jake and Mary's joint management. The horses they trained earned a reputation for quality, and buyers came from across the territory. They hired more hands, built a new corral, and expanded the barn. In December, on a cold evening with snow falling gently outside, Jake asked Mary to marry him. They were sitting by the fire in the ranch house, comfortable in each other's presence the way only people who've been through hell together can be. I know you've been married before, Jake said. I know people said terrible things about you because of it. But I love you, Mary Sullivan. I want to build a life with you, face whatever comes next, together. Will you marry me? Mary was quiet for so long that Jake started to worry. Then she smiled, tears in her eyes. Everyone said I'd ruin you. They said any man who got close to me would end up dead or destroyed. They were wrong about a lot of things. They were. And yes, Jake Morgan, I'll marry you. Not because I need someone to save me, but because we saved each other. They married in January in the small church in Cottonwood Creek. Doc Miller gave Mary away. Pete stood as Jake's best man. Lisa Chen and her husband attended along with half the town. Even Sheriff Peterson came, bringing his wife and children. It was a simple ceremony, nothing fancy. But it meant everything to Jake and Mary. When they exchanged vows, they weren't just promising to love each other. They were promising to stand together against whatever challenges life might bring. They'd already proven they could keep that promise. The reception was held at the ranch, in the barn they'd worked so hard to repair. Someone brought a fiddle, and there was dancing and laughter. Pete got drunk and told stories about John Harrison, Mary's first husband, remembering him with fondness rather than sadness. Doc Miller gave a speech about courage and justice that made several people cry. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Jake and Mary stood outside under the stars. The same stars that had watched them fight for survival were now watching them celebrate their future. Are you happy? Jake asked. Happier than I ever thought I'd be again. Happier than I probably deserve. You deserve everything good in this world. Never doubt that. Mary leaned against him. When you walked into that saloon 6 months ago, I thought you were just another drifter looking for work. I never imagined you'd become my partner, my defender, my husband. Life's funny that way. Sometimes the best things find us when we're not even looking. They stood there in comfortable silence, two people who'd been tested by fire and emerged stronger. The territory that had tried to destroy Mary Sullivan had instead witnessed her triumph. The cowboy who'd chosen her had faced down impossible odds and won not just the battle, but something far more valuable. He'd won a home, a partner, a future worth fighting for. The next spring brought new challenges and new opportunities. A railroad company announced plans to build a line through the valley, which would make it easier to ship horses and bring in supplies. Property values began to rise, and several new families moved into the area. The old Cooper Ranch was sold at auction. A family from Colorado bought it and began raising cattle. They were good neighbors, friendly and hardworking. The darkness that had hung over that property seemed to lift. Jake and Mary hired 2 more hands and began breeding horses specifically for ranch work. Their reputation grew, and orders came in from as far away as Montana and Arizona. The ranch that had been on the verge of collapse was now one of the most successful in the territory. One evening in May, Mary told Jake she was pregnant. They'd hoped for children but hadn't been sure it would happen. The news filled them both with joy and a little fear. "What if something goes wrong?" Mary asked. "What if the old curse wasn't really broken?" Jake pulled her close. "There never was a curse. There was just bad luck and other people's cruelty. Our child will grow up strong and loved, surrounded by people who care about them. That's not a curse. That's a blessing." The baby was born in January, a healthy girl with her mother's green eyes and her father's stubborn chin. They named her Grace because Grace was what had brought them through the darkness. Holding his daughter for the first time, Jake thought about everything that had happened. If someone had told him a year and a half ago that taking a job at a cursed ranch would lead to this, a wife he loved, a thriving business, a daughter, a place he could truly call home, he would never have believed them. But life had a way of surprising you. Sometimes the hardest battles led to the greatest rewards. Sometimes choosing to stand up when everyone else was sitting down changed everything. Mary came to stand beside him, looking down at their sleeping daughter. "She's perfect. She is. Just like her mother. I keep thinking about what people said about me, about how I'd ruin any man who got close to me, about how I was cursed. And I think maybe I was cursed in a way. Cursed with bad luck and cruel gossip and people who wanted to destroy me. But then you came along and broke the curse by not believing in it, by choosing me anyway." Jake kissed her forehead. "I chose you because you were worth choosing, because you're strong and brave and good. The whole territory was wrong about you, Mary, and I'm grateful every day that I was smart enough to see the truth." Outside, the sun was setting over the ranch they'd fought so hard to save. The valley was peaceful, prosperous. The land that had been a battlefield was now a home. They'd claimed that she'd ruin any man who got close to her, but Jake Morgan had gotten close, had chosen her when no one else would, had faced down the whole territory to stand by her side. And instead of being ruined, he'd found everything he'd been searching for. Sometimes the best stories aren't about heroes who never fall. They're about ordinary people who fall and get back up. About choosing courage over fear. About standing up for what's right even when the whole world says you're wrong. Jake and Mary's story was that kind of story. Not a fairy tale, but something better, something real and hard-won and true. They'd faced their demons, fought their battles, and emerged victorious not because they were special or blessed, but because they refused to give up. As Grace stirred in his arms and Mary smiled at them both, Jake felt a deep contentment settle over him. This was what he'd been searching for all along, even when he didn't know what he was looking for. A family, a home, a purpose. The territory had tried to break them. Instead, they'd broken the territory's lies and built something beautiful from the ruins, and that was worth everything.